Hi everyone, it's Lauren, and in this video I'm going to be reviewing all of the books that I've read in the month of April. Now I had actually a better reading month in April, volume wise, than I thought I would, because I was training for the marathon and just had a lot of stuff going on in my personal life, so I didn't think I'd get that much read, but I did manage to get through quite a few things. Although I did have one or two books that I read that I had some quite strong feelings about, negative feelings, I will clarify. Also some stuff I really liked, but this might become a bit of an interesting wrap up. So the first book that I read was The Refugees by Viet Thanh Nguyen, and this is a collection of short stories. All of the characters in these stories have a link somehow to Vietnam, so a lot of them are the children of or are refugees themselves from Vietnam now living in America, or they're people who are still living in Vietnam with family elsewhere, and it's about those cultural links between the two countries and the two different perspectives. But all of them as well have something missing in them, so they either have a sense of longing of something that they've missed, like they're grieving for a relative, or they feel like life hasn't handed them the best deal. So there is this overriding emotion throughout the collection of a kind of dull, quiet sadness. Something that I found very impressive with the writing in here is that you're not with these characters for very long, and yet he manages to get so much information and context and backstory into a very short space of time. For me, I just felt like this was fine. This is like a solid 3-star book. I did appreciate the writing style while I was reading it, but none of the stories have really super kept with me. I didn't have a huge emotional impact from them, but still very interesting. And I think for someone else who maybe was in a different frame of mind when they read it, they would really enjoy this. I next picked up Asymmetry by Lisa Halliday, and this is a debut novel. It's called Asymmetry because the novel itself is not symmetrical. That's how I like to think of it, although there's lots of different reasons for this title. This is essentially 2 stories which are extremely tenuously linked, but it does kind of work as an overall book. So the first story is about this young woman who starts an affair with a much older, very successful novelist, and then the second story is about a young man from America who is going home to Iraq, but on his way there, at his connecting flight, he's stopped at an airport in London and they're unable to let him enter the country. So his story is flitting between his own memories of his family in Iraq and their immigration to America, and then also his time in this detention centre. And then right at the end of the novel, there is a very short interview with the author from the first story, which is a transcript of an appearance on Desert Island Discs. The broader theme of the book basically is an imbalance of power, and that's between people in relationships and also more widely and politically in terms of countries and cultures. And so there was a very definite link in theme in that way, although the 2 stories are written very differently. And I do think it's a really interesting thing she's done with the structure here, because she hasn't felt restricted by form. I feel like she's basically written the book that she wants to write, and the fact that it's not really linked and it's a little bit lopsided when you read it, she's just gone, no, well, this is what I wanted, so that's what I'm going to do. And I quite admire that. So I think this is a really interesting and exciting first start, considering it's a debut, and I'd really recommend it, although I would go in knowing that it's almost like 2 stories and not really one novel. So I think if you have that in mind when you read it, then I definitely recommend this. Now something less positive, unfortunately, and that is The Gap of Time by Jeanette Winterson, and this book made me incredibly angry, and I really disliked it. I thought it was dreadful, and I say that with a little bit of hesitation because I read this quite early on in the month, so I feel like since reading it, my anger towards it has just built up and grown as we have moved towards this review. So you know, things might get a little bit heated, but oh my god, I love Jeanette Winterson's writing. I've read The Stone Gods, I've read Written on the Body by her, and I really like that. But this is probably the laziest thing I have ever read. This is part of the Hogarth Shakespeare series, where contemporary authors are reimagining Shakespeare plays, and this is an adaptation of The Winter's Tale. It is about a king who decides randomly that his wife has been unfaithful to him, and the daughter that she's bearing is the daughter of his friend. So he kind of exiles her, gets rid of the baby, like falls out with his friend. The baby gets raised elsewhere. In this version, Jeanette Winterson has made the king, Polixenes, into a kind of successful banker or like city trader kind of guy, but it just rang so false. I felt like she'd never met anybody who had worked in the financial industry, and when he's getting angry because he thinks his wife's having an affair, he's just swearing and swearing, and it just felt so pathetic. It felt like if you see a teenager in a school play and they're like trying to act like an adult, it felt like that. I was thinking, people don't really talk like this, Jeanette. And the characters that raise the baby in the second half of the play, the shepherd and the clown, she's taken those characters and taken them to the US, and she just called them Shep and Chloe. And I just thought, but they're not names though, are they? Like, what's Shep short for, other than shepherd? Like, it's just really weird. And the point at which I stopped reading the book, which was halfway through, to be fair, was when Chloe and Perdita and her friends are all talking, and they reference somebody's knickers. This is such a stupid example, but American teenagers, American people don't say knickers, they say panties. Like, well, I mean, if I know that, surely that's true. If you're American and you say knickers, do you know what? I'm sorry. Comment below and tell me. But I just felt like it was so lazy. It was like she hadn't researched how people speak properly. All of the characters felt so like two-dimensional and stereotypical, and none of the conversation or the dialogue just felt true to me. Like, it all just felt very, very weak. If you've read this, if you have different thoughts, you know, please let me know. Please talk to me in the comments, because I had such high hopes for this, and I'm incredibly disappointed with it. Speaking of disappointments, the other book that I put down halfway through this month was The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. I was going to say William Shakespeare then. I was like, who cares who it's by? I thought it was rubbish. It's about an old man and his granddaughter Nell, who own a curiosity shop, but he gambles away all of their fortune, and this evil dwarf man, Daniel Quilp, is after them to get their money, and so they run away in the night. And I got to nearly halfway through the book, and most of it was just the grandfather and little Nell going from town to town, wandering through the English countryside, going, oh, what should we do now? And meeting some people, and then going, oh, we can't stay here, and meeting some people. Nothing was happening at all. It was just ambling and meandering through the plot, and basically it just felt like Dickens was trying to extend this plot as much as he could so he could continue with his commission. I'm presuming this was published in a magazine, I'm just assuming that, but that's what it felt like. And I just thought, no, I have no time for this. And also the characters were really unsympathetic. I guess Nell is supposed to be our tragic heroine, but the grandfather, I was just like, I have no sympathy for you, mate. You've just gambled away all your money and you keep gambling. Like, why should I care about you? I want Quilp to find you. Let's end on a good note, shall we? So I'm very pleased to say that I read 2 poetry collections this month and enjoyed them both, which is a very big thumbs up, because I have been struggling to find some poetry that I really connect with recently. So the first one is Odes by Sharon Olds, and this is a very interesting collection. Sharon Olds is looking at herself, at her childhood, but mostly about her body and her aging body and her relationship with others. But all of the poems are in form of odes, and it has some delightful numbers such as Blowjob Ode. We've got like Ode to Menstrual Blood, Ode to the penis, ode to the tampon. So it is interesting, and it is very kind of visceral and biological, a lot of it. But I really enjoyed that, because it's almost like behind that guise of being very silly and very funny, there's actually quite a lot to it. And the way she describes testicles, for example, you kind of think, yeah, that's right, Sharon. I really get where she's coming from and what her experience of being in her body is like, and I really felt some emotional depth in there. So I thought this was brilliant. And this last collection was my favourite book that I read all month, and that is Kanda by Kayo Chingonyi. And Kanda is a initiation rite in northwest Zambia for young boys going into adulthood. And so in absence of this aspect of his culture, Kayo has looked back at that time in his life and done poems about all forms of adolescence. So he deals with losing his parents, he deals with trying to fit in at school, he deals with growing up and experiencing racism, and it's a look back at that time in his life and almost trying to prize some understanding out of it and really encapsulate that experience. What I absolutely loved about this book is that it feels so effortless, and the writing seems to be very simple. You feel like he's actually speaking to you, but it's deceptively simple, because there's some really interesting uses of language and imagery, and there's some very beautiful things things going on in this book, but it just feels like he's not even trying, and that is just an amazing thing to see happen. I also love the parts where he's talking about growing up and the music that he's listening to, and we grew up in a very similar area of the UK. He must only be a year or two older than me, because I really related to some of these experiences where he's talking about listening to UK garage in like the early 2000s and like burning discs and bring them into school on your Walkman. I was just like, yes, this is an experience I could attest to. But what I loved about the collection is that that side of it really spoke to me, something that I was familiar with, and the experiences of his life that I'm not familiar with similarly really spoke to me, and I felt like he was very successful in his aims of explaining his experiences and getting that out there. I felt like I really got it. So that is absolute testament to the quality of his writing, and I think actually this would be a fantastic place to start if you're new to poetry, because it's not trying or not appearing to try and do anything too crazy with the form itself, but he does try out different forms and different structures, and he does some different things with his language, but all of these different attempts, you still feel like you make that connection emotionally with what he's trying to say. So yeah, I have nothing but good things to say about this book and would highly recommend it. Bit of a mixed bag there. I am overall coming out of the month feeling a little bit dissatisfied, I would say. I feel like there's not been anything that's really captured my interest, like apart from Kanda, which I really enjoyed. But it feels like because that was poems, it doesn't feel like I've really got my teeth into anything properly meaty this month. So wiping the slate clean and looking forward to May. I would love to hear from you what you've been reading this month, if you've read any of these books. I always like hearing other people's opinions, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!